And welcome back to SP Channel. Happy Halloween, everybody. The holiday season is nearly upon us. Halloween is one of modern society's most anticipated holidays of the year. Many people begin planning their All Hallows Eve activities months in advance. Halloween in its modern incarnation has taken on a life of its own. It's a time of the year when people throw lavish parties and dress in costume. They practice long-standing traditions like trick-or-treating. But do you know the story of Halloween? How Halloween came to be? As fall gives way to winter, plenty turns to paucity. The leaves of the trees display a multitude of fall colors as life submits to death. Halloween is a time of celebration and superstition. It's thought to have originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off evil roaming spirits.
Hey, SP, you can't forget trick-or-treating. It's an old tradition among the Saxons and the Angles to leave out pastries and sweets. That way they can appease the spirits. There's also the jack-o'-lanterns, which you are not supposed to extinguish until the next morning. It's supposed to be I would say, deterrent from evil during that time.
In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as the time to honor all saints and martyrs. This holiday became known as All Saints' Day and incorporated traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows Eve and later became known as Halloween.
Yeah, SP and viewers out there, the Halloween is not the only ceremony to honor the dead. There is also the Day of the Dead in Mexico and the Ghost Festival, which is the 15th of every 7th month in the year. And yeah, it makes me wonder if the celebration of our dead is not a thing we used to do before Pangea split. So in honor of this long-held tradition, we're going to do a special.
In honor of All Hallows Eve, SP Channel has went in depth to find some of the most credible monster stories on Earth. These stories are some of the most well-documented cases in recorded history. Without further hesitation, SP Channel presents to you Beyond the Fiction, True Monsters Throughout History. Count Dracula, the first vampire. Many people have heard the legends of Count Dracula, but far fewer know the true story of Vlad the Impaler, the true Count Dracula, the first vampire. Vlad Tepes, or Vlad III, was the prince of Wallachia, a small province in Romania, 3 times between 1448 and his eventual death. Vlad Tepes was the son of Vlad Dracula, hence his Dracula family name. He was a brutal ruler known to his enemies as Vlad the Impaler because his favorite method of execution was to impale his victims on wooden pyres with spiked tips to exert his dominance over his enemies. He was often known to attend these executions to catch their blood in a small chalice to drink from their essence as it trickled down the wooden pole. This was to show his enemies that he was a dominant force and that he would consume them, as he believed drinking his enemies' blood would grant him their power and wisdom. Vlad's most loyal subjects referred to him as Count Dracula. These are the true events that fuel the modern mythology of vampires. This is where the idea that vampires obtain otherworldly abilities by drinking the blood of their victims originated. This is where the idea of driving a wooden stake through a vampire's heart would end their undead torment.
Hey, SP, we can't forget Elizabeth Bathory. She lived through the 15 to 1600s, and, well, she used to bathe in the blood of virgins because she thought that it would grant her, not really immortality, but vitality and youthfulness all of her life. So basically she was trying to preserve her beauty by consuming and delving into blood.
Zombies. While never in recorded history has there ever been a large-scale zombie outbreak, there are certain retrograde viruses like the rabies virus that can, when contracted through the olfactory nerve, which rests between the ventromedial hypothalamus, the frontal cortex, and the amygdala, cause zombified effects and leave other areas of the brain unaffected. These viruses, while well documented, are very rare to contract in this method. However, In those documented cases, it has been proven olfactory transmission of viruses such as rabies can lead to super hungry, aggressive, brain-dead victims that cannot recognize their family, friends, or control their own actions other than to feed. Viruses, being the living organisms that they are, mutate at random. The only thing preventing mankind from a true zombie apocalypse seems to be fate.
While you are talking about the 28-day later and outbreak zombies, there's another kind that has held precedence within the annals of our history. The slow-walking and mindless droning zombies of George A. Romero. Now, he didn't get this idea out of nowhere. He got it out of the practices of voodoo and hoodoo. And in these practices, the Bokor, or the priestess or priest, will take quite a few different things to make a powder which they can blow in a person's face and turn them into a zombie. One of the main ingredients in this that actually serves to numb the person's wits and to basically lobotomize them due to lack of oxygen from this procedure is called tetrodotoxin, and it's from a pufferfish. It's specifically the liver and reproductive organs of the pufferfish. Now, what this tetrodotoxin does is it slows the heart rate down to unmonitorable levels. And at that point, the person clinically and perceptively becomes dead. Now, when the toxin wears off, the most that is left of the person is the central nervous system. Now, from there, you have a willing and witting, well, not so much witting, but a willing zombie.
Witches. Witchcraft and the belief in its practices have existed throughout recorded history. The worldview of witches and the role they play in society have changed to fit the social and cultural views of various times in many diverse forms among cultures and religions worldwide, including both primitive and highly advanced cultures. The infamous Salem witch trials began during the spring of 1692 after a group of young girls in Salem Village, Massachusetts claimed to be possessed by the devil and accused several local women of witchcraft. As a wave of hysteria spread throughout colonial Massachusetts, a special court convened in Salem to hear these cases. The first convicted witch, Bridget Bishop, was hanged that June. 18 others followed Bishop to Salem's Gallows Hill, while some 150 more men, women, and children were accused over the next several months, and so began the Salem witch trials. Balthasar von Dernbach, the prince and abbot of a small town in Fulda in Germany, was a notorious witch hunter who embarked on a series of trials known as the Fulda witch trials, which lasted between 1603 and 1606. Marga Bean was a wealthy German heiress. She murdered her second husband and her children with him and attended Sabbaths held by Satan, or at least that's what she was forced to confess while being tortured in prison. She was pregnant, but that didn't save her from execution, as the court believed she was carrying a baby fathered by the devil. The Fulda witch trials led to the execution of 250 suspects over 3 years. Marga Bean was the most famous of them all, and the first to be burned alive at the stake.
Hey, SP. The Salem witch trials occurred in colonial Massachusetts between 1692 and 1693. More than 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft, and 20 were executed. But that's not the very beginning of it. The very beginning of it dates back to paganism. Paganism was considered to be witchcraft by the Christians and by quite a few other groups. Paganism is basically the belief and worship in nature. The Celtics had a sect called the Druids, which means priest, magician, or soothsayer in Celtic. Now, the Druids would use herbs and medicines to heal people, and from just their knowledge alone about medicinal plants, they were called witches and were killed duly so.
Ghosts. The belief in the existence of an afterlife, as well as manifestations of spirits of the dead, is widespread, dating back to animism, or ancestor worship in pre-literate cultures. A ghost is the soul or spirit of a dead person or animal that can appear to the living. Descriptions of ghosts vary widely, from an invisible presence to a translucent or barely visible wispy shape, to realistic, lifelike visions. The deliberate attempt to contact the spirit of a deceased person is known as necromancy, or in spiritualism as a seance. One of the most well-known sightings of the presence of ghost activity would be the case of Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was the second wife of King Henry VIII and mother of a future Queen Elizabeth I. Anne Boleyn had 3 years as queen consort before Henry tired of her. Most historians agree Anne Boleyn was falsely accused of adultery and witchcraft. She faced an executioner's sword with her head held high on May 19, 1536. The executioner was reported to have said, "Where's my sword?" before striking the single blow necessary, apparently in an effort to ease Anne's anticipation by making her think she had a few moments more. The ghost of Anne Boleyn has been spotted by several different people in several different locations. Herver Castle, Blickingling Hall, Shale Church, Marwell Hall, and perhaps, most famously, the Tower of London. Though she is most often seen just as she was alive, a beautiful woman in a beautiful gown, some sightings are a bit more upsetting. More unlucky individuals will see her just as she was right after death, headless, often with the head tucked under one arm. It's become such an iconic image, it has often been parodied in movies and television and more elaborate Halloween costumes. One must not forget, however, what would you think if such a vision approached you in some dark corridor one night?
I believe the poor headless lady, or headless horseman, that you may be referring to, could be considered a doulahan. In Irish fairy tales and folklores, they are headless horsemen or riders or even specters that are holding their head under their right hand, coming to chauffeur the dead to the next realm.
Werewolves. The legends of werewolves are widespread concepts in European folklore. These legends exist in many forms, spanning back from the Middle Ages till the early modern era, but all of those legends can be traced back to medieval European folklore. The belief of werewolves also spread to the New World with colonialism. It's believed that the origins of werewolves developed parallel to a belief in witches. In fact, much like witchcraft, the trial of alleged werewolves emerged in what is now Switzerland. Hypertrichosis is an abnormal amount of hair growth all over the body. Extensive cases of hypertrichosis have informally been called werewolf syndrome because the appearance of those who suffer from hypertrichosis is similar to that of a werewolf. There are 2 distinct types of hypertrichosis: generalized hypertrichosis, which occurs all over the body, and localized hypertrichosis, which is restricted to a certain area. Hypertrichosis can be either congenital or acquired later in life.
Not only do you have the physical disease, hypertrichosis, but you have the mental disease, clinical lycanthropy. Clinical lycanthropy is defined as a rare psychiatric syndrome that involves an illusion that the affected person can transform into, has transformed into, or is a non-human animal. One of the most famous cases of clinical lycanthropy is a man named Peter Stubb. Peter Stubb, which died in 1589. Peter Stubb, he was accused of being a serial killer and a cannibal. His nickname was the Werewolf of Bedburg. Now, he was sentenced to death for the serial killings of 18 people. and the killings spanned between 1564 and 1589. The country he was in was the Holy Roman Empire. The accusations, now Stubb was a very strange account. For 25 years, Stubb had allegedly been an insatiable bloodsucker who gorged off the flesh of goats and lambs and sheep. Now, this slowly turned into something quite different when he started to cannibalize his own fellow humans. He believed that the devil had given him a wolf hide belt, and with this belt he could turn into a werewolf as long as he had it on. When he took it off, he turned back into a human.
Aliens. The universe is vast, possibly infinite. In such a vast space, things like time and probability dictate that life cannot be unique to just one tiny space such as planet Earth. Theories like the Drake equation and star seeding have proven microbial life forms can live for very long periods of time inside meteorites and travel long distances in the vast regions of space. I submit for your approval the case of Travis Walton. According to Walton, on November 5, 1975, he was working with a lumbering crew in Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. While riding in a truck with 6 of his co-workers, they encountered a saucer-shaped object hovering over the ground approximately 150 feet away, making a high-pitched buzz. Walton claims he left the truck and approached it when a beam of light suddenly appeared from the craft, knocking him to the ground. The other 6 men were frightened and supposedly drove away. Walton claimed that he awoke in a hospital-like room being observed by 3 short, bald creatures. When they left, a person entered the room wearing some sort of helmet and led Walton to another room where 3 more people put a clear plastic mask over his face and he blacked out. Walton has claimed he remembers nothing else after he found himself walking along the highway with the flying saucer departing above him. Walton has been subjected to various psychological evaluations and 4 separate lie detector tests. Walton has many hardened skeptics convinced his claim is genuine.
Be they elves or be they little gray men from space, either way, extraterrestrials hold a fascinating and yet terrifying place in our pop culture. Now, I submit to you the case of Betty and Barney Hill, or the Hill incident as it's become known. They were an American couple, a very lovely interracial couple, which was very odd for the times back then because it was in the 60s. Now, they were abducted by extraterrestrials in a rural portion of New Hampshire, September 19th to September 20th, 1961. The incident became later known as the Hill abduction or the Zeta Reticuli incident. It was adapted into the best-selling book in 1966 titled The Interrupted Journey, and later on adapted to film in 1975, which was titled The UFO Incident. Most of Betty Hill's notes, tapes, and other items have been placed in permanent collection at the University of New Hampshire. The encounter itself, according to reports given by the Hills, the UFO sighting happened on September 19th, 1961, around 10:30 p.m. The Hills were driving back from Portsmouth from a vacation, Niagara Falls, and Montreal. There were only a few other cars on the road just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire. Betty claimed to have observed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upwards to the west of the moon while Barney navigated U.S. Route 3. Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star, only it moved upward. Since it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, as well as to walk the dog. Delsey. Barney stopped at the scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountains. Worried about the presence of bears, Barney retrieved a pistol that he kept in the trunk of the car. Betty, through binoculars, observed the odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights and traveling across the face of the moon. Because her sister had confided to her about having a flying saucer sighting several years earlier, Betty thought it might be what she was observing. Through the binoculars, Barney observed what he reasoned was a commercial airliner traveling towards Vermont on its way to Montreal. Immediate aftermath after their encounter, arriving home at about dawn, the Hills assert they had some old sensations and impulses they could not readily explain. Betty insisted their luggage be kept near the back door rather than in the main part of the house. Their watches would never run again. Barney said that the leather strap on his binoculars was torn, though he could not recall tearing it. The toes of his best dress shoes were scraped. Barney says he was compelled to examine his genitals in the bathroom. Though he found nothing unusual, they took long showers to remove possible contamination, and each drew a picture of what they had observed. Initial report to the U.S. Air Force and NICAP. On September 21st, Betty telephoned Pease Air Force Base to report their UFO encounter. Though for fear of being labeled eccentric, she withheld some of the details. On September 22nd, Major Paul W. Henderson telephoned the Hills for a more detailed interview. Henderson's report, dated September 26, determined that the Hills had probably misidentified the planet Jupiter. This was later changed to optical condition inversion and insufficient data. Report 10-161, Air Force Intelligence Information Record. Within days of the encounter, Betty borrowed a UFO book from the library. It had been written by retired Marine Corps Major Donald E. Keyhoe, who was also the head of NICAP, a civilian UFO research group. On September 26, Betty wrote to Keyhoe. She related the full story, including the details about the humanoid figures and that Barney had observed through binoculars. Betty wrote that she and Barney were considering hypnosis to help recall what happened. Her letter was eventually passed on to Walter N. Webb, a Boston astronomer and NICAP member.
Demons. Demonic possession is the belief that an individual can be possessed by malevolent preternatural beings, commonly referred to as demons. There are two forms of demonic aggression toward human beings: obsessions and possessions. These different kinds of demonic activity are placed in the rank of apparitions of the evil spirit of man. It's a demonic obsession when the demon acts externally against the person whom it besets. It's demonic possession when the demon acts internally within its victim. Demonic possession is often classified by its more common side effects. Demonic possession can excite ill, wicked humor in their victims and make them verbally aggressive and abusive toward others. Very often, the possessed will speak tongues they never learned. Demonic entities are often known to reveal unknown secrets and inspire knowledge of the most obscure things in philosophy and theology. Descriptions of demonic possessions often include erased memories or personalities, convulsions, and fainting as if one were dying. Often, possessed individuals suffer from drastic changes in their vocal intonation and facial structure. Sometimes, victims suffer from the sudden appearance of injuries or lesions. A possessed individual may even display inhuman strength. Unlike channeling, the subject has no control over the entity possessing them, so the attacks persist until the entity is forced to leave its victim, usually through a form of exorcism. One of the most famous stories of demonic possession is that of Annalise Michel. Annalise's story has been the basis of many fictional movies, including the 2005 movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The girl behind the story, Annalise Michel, had a history of epilepsy and mental illness, which over the course of her life worsened. In 1973, when she was 15 years old, Annalise became suicidal and began displaying some strange behavior. She began to hear voices and feared religious artifacts and symbolism. None of her previous treatments were working against her worsening condition, and she began requesting for priests to help her with what she considered a case of possession. Although her parents were against this, a couple of local priests began performing exorcisms on her. A total of 70 over the course of her life. None of these seemed to be working, and to make matters worse, her parents held back her medication, withholding her from receiving medical treatment. Her story ended tragically when Annalise eventually died from starvation and neglect, and her family and the priests were charged with homicide.
I would like to present to you folks something very interesting that I found out during a movie of a exorcism that I watched. It was kind of a horror flick, not really a true to life movie. But did you guys know that we have two sets of vocal cords? We have true vocal cords and false vocal cords. Now, in Tubian throat singing and Tibetan monk chanting, you can learn how to use the false vocal cords to produce a second voice coming from your throat. Now, this would mean that a person could talk in two voices. And if you pair this with, say, a mental illness like multiple personality disorder, then you would get one scary looking outcome. It would look like the person was possessed by the spirit of another person. Now, the reason for the difference between the voices within the vocal cords themselves is the false vocal cords are normally thicker and larger, which makes them sound deeper and graspier. When it comes to a woman, they will sound like a male, and when it comes to a male, they will sound like something from hell. Good night, guys. I hope you have enjoyed The True Monsters.
There are many things that go bump in the night. So remember, the next time you hear that rumbling under your bed or that strange noise downstairs, just turn the volume up. We're always awake at SP Channel.